long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined again by Ken Katkin, a law professor at Chase Law. Welcome back to the show, Ken.
Thanks, Trey. It's great to be back.
Well, and you're now joining me from your actual hometown again, as opposed to out into the mountainous regions, right?
Yes, I was away in the fall at the University of Colorado, but this semester in the spring, I am back at my home institution, Northern Kentucky University.
Well, I mean, that's exciting because I think today, maybe you'll be our on-the-ground reporter for Northern Kentucky.
Yep.
For infamous reasons. But, before we get into that, there was actually a bit of news today before we were getting ready to do the podcast. And that was after, Roger Stone is indicted. And, of course, Roger Stone has been saying he's going to get indicted for how long?
Yeah, for months now. In fact, it's a bit of a mystery why it took this long after he was out there announcing it.
Yeah, which is an interesting strategy. But if you haven't heard, and I'm sure you will, Roger Stone is President Donald Trump's longtime friend, veteran political operative, and he was obviously arrested today, Friday, by Robert Mueller after a 7-count indictment against him as part of the ongoing probe that we've talked about on the show into Russian interference during the 2016 elections. Now, most of this is mainly about false statements, but one of the interesting things that Ken has noticed comes from a closer look at the indictment itself. And so, Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute. Talk to us about this paragraph 12 in the indictment.
Yeah, so first let me just briefly summarize in case not all the listeners already know, although they probably do. But Roger Stone was indicted essentially for obstruction of justice, for lying to law enforcement on questions that he was asked related to his contacts with WikiLeaks. And as you already said, it's not at all a surprise that he was indicted and arrested for this. He himself has been on television for the past couple months saying he's going to be indicted and arrested for this. And his accomplices, Randy Credico and Jerome Corsi, have been saying the same things. And I think Corsi's been saying he's also going to be indicted, although that hasn't happened yet. But the one thing that I found extremely interesting when I looked at the indictment document is that, most of what was in it had been expected. It's basically saying that there was a back channel between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks, and that Stone himself was basically running that back channel, and that there were communications going back and forth between the Trump campaign and Trump Tower and WikiLeaks in both directions, through Stone and through a couple of Stone's accomplices. So that was sort of what had been anticipated. But the big question has been, how high up in the Trump campaign does this go? Giuliani recently, for instance, has been saying, well, we never said that people in the Trump campaigon weren't conspiring with Russia. We just said Trump wasn't conspiring with Russia.
Right, and that's going to be something we're going to talk about a lot today, yeah.
Yeah, because paragraph 12 is the only thing I saw in the indictment that addresses that question. So the sentence that you and I both looked at, it's just one sentence. The language is a little bit dense, but it says, this is alleging the allegations against Stone, and it says, after the July 22nd, 2016 release of stolen DNC emails by Organization One, which is WikiLeaks, a senior Trump campaign official was directed to contact Stone about any additional releases and what other damaging information WikiLeaks had regarding the Clinton campaign. Now, so that phrase, it's very much in a passive voice. It doesn't say who was doing the directing, but it says a senior Trump campaign official was directed to contact Stone.
And there's not many people on that list.
Yeah. Who could give a direction like that to a senior Trump campaign official, right? So it's not saying that the senior Trump campaign official is the one who gave the direction. It's saying that the senior Trump campaign official was the one who received the direction, who was directed to contact Stone. So, that seems to me like there's an incredibly small list of people that would be in a position to give a direction like that to a senior campaign official and have that direction actually carried out. And I can't really think of anyone other than the president or Don Trump Jr. or possibly Jared who might be able to give a direction like that to a senior campaign official and have it carried out. And notably, July 22nd means it could not have been Steve Bannon. He did not start working for the campaign until August, so I think he can be ruled out as the one who gave the direction.
So in short, it's somebody with the last name Trump, probably.
Yeah, possibly Kushner, but probably Trump, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think that's just a kind of a fascinating position. And what's going to be really interesting about this is, if it is in fact Trump that's being indicated here. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this because this is your area of expertise, but there can't be a charge coming out of Mueller's office against the president, correct?
Right. So there's two levels I can answer that on. The constitutional question is actually an uncertain one, right? Since it's never happened, there's never been a court that has weighed in on whether it could happen or not. There's no language in the Constitution that says it can't happen, but it never has happened. But at a more practical level, it won't happen because the Justice Department has long had a policy that says it's the policy of the Justice Department that the Justice Department will not indict a sitting president. And Mueller is bound by all those Justice Department policies, and he's a very by-the-book guy. So he would not indict a sitting president in violation of that policy. And I'm fairly sure that neither Whitaker nor Barr is looking into changing that policy right now. So,
that's an interesting question that I've often had because as one who looks at the Constitution, but not as much as the legal precedent as you do, I've always wondered, other than the pragmatic reason that the Justice Department is obviously part of the executive branch, what the point of that particular directive is? It just a pragmatic directive in the sense that they don't want to have to cross that river? Or what do you think? I don't know that historical bit.
There's a few historical and structural readings of the Constitution that have, I think, led a lot of scholars to think that that's the right policy. So one is a theory that you sometimes hear called the unitary executive theory, the idea that the Constitution vests all of the executive power in one president of the United States in the vesting clause of Article 2, and then it can be delegated downward. But that means that all the powers that the Justice Department has are delegated downward from the president.
Meaning he could rescind them, in other words, it's in him personally.
That he has to actually be the head of the Justice Department formally, even if there's a lot of statutes that Congress has passed that are law that authorize the Justice Department to take certain actions, but that ultimately, even though we have an Attorney General, the Attorney General is subordinate to the President. The President is the true head of the Justice Department, as he's the true head of every other department. So under that theory, decisions like that could turn on the president would have to ultimately be up to the president to decide whether to do it or not. And so there's just an implication there that the president would not want himself indicted, and it's ultimately his call. And so that's just a blanket policy that relieves the president from having to say in an individual case, I don't want to be indicted in this case. So that's one, that he has that authority, and that all presidents would want to exercise that authority that way. And then the other kind of different, separate structural implications. One is that the president has the pardon power. So there's the idea that a president would be able to possibly pardon himself or pardon any of his other top officials. And the third is that the president, the country would be deprived of the head of the executive branch. That it's the only branch that is headed up by just one person. So Congress has 535 members. Even the Supreme Court has 9 members. Those branches could function if someone who was at the top level of those branches was tied up in a criminal trial or something. But there's the idea that you kind of decapitate the executive branch if you tie up the president as a defendant in a criminal trial during his presidency.
Now that's interesting. Again, I think a lot of us have been thinking about those kinds of possibilities, and then when you kind of read that sentence and something that's coming to your mind, but I think this is kind of early on in the process, as we had talked about a little bit off the air, and anything that I think that we're outside of, I think what we've said is probably going to be it's a little bit speculation until this, but that I think is the fascinating question at this juncture. So Ken, what I think we might do is we might leave Stone behind. I'm sure that in this upcoming week there'll be more.
The one last thing I would add, though, is that people have talked about the idea of sealed indictments. So even within the Justice Department policy that a sitting president can't be indicted while he's in office, there has been discussion, and this appears in the report of what most people think of as the Starr report, although by the time it was actually published and issued, Ken Starr had stepped down and his successor, Robert Ray, issued it. But there is some discussion in that about the mechanism of indicting the president and keeping the indictment sealed until he's not the president anymore, and then unsealing the indictments and moving ahead with the criminal prosecution after he's out of office.
The other really big issue that happened over the weekend, as a matter of fact, and then kind of came back around on Monday, and I know this is something a lot of our listeners have been talking about online, is something that is actually pretty close to me historically, and you can right now, and that is Covington Catholic and the interaction and the pictures surrounding the interaction that occurred around the Lincoln Memorial. So for listeners, I'm sure most of you probably know this story, but effectively what has happened is we have the original story comes out. There's just a video that's there. There's a Covington Catholic boy who's been there. They're appearing to kind of being around near this. There's an Indigenous Peoples Day rally going on at the same time that there is a pro-life rally going on, and there seems to be this confrontation where the boy in a "Make America Great Again" hat, because you got to have the image, is smirking at this Native American who is kind of peacefully beating his drum, and there seems to be some pretty nasty things potentially going on in the background, very much summed up by the smirk on this kid's face. And I think that's kind of what hit all the rounds. But then as we came around onto Monday, a lot more information comes out, new video cameras come up. It becomes clear there's actually some additional groups who are making noise, making derogatory comments towards the boys. And in this case, Phillips, who is the boy in question, even his looks take on another kind of meaning because he doesn't seem to be just this smirking jerk. And so then we have a lot of retractions this week. So there's been a lot of question, not just about the incident at the Lincoln Memorial, but about the way that we consume information and how quickly that we render judgment on it. As a matter of fact, Covington Catholic had to shut down for at least 1 or was it 2 days, Ken, this week?
Yeah, I don't know if it was 1 or 2, but I do know that they have a big basketball game against Holmes tonight that's been canceled as well.
Oh, so, I had not seen that. Yeah, Holmes High School is another really big, another big high school in the area. Yeah. Back in the day, I had a lot of friends who went there.
The impact of that locally is not completely over, although I think the school is open again.
Okay, because there had been a lot of threats against Phillips, his family, and obviously the school. So there's a lot that can kind of be tackled here, Ken. But what do you think about not just the interaction here, which I think is interesting, but about the way that it unfolded through social media up into what you might consider traditional broadcast media, and then around again as we come into Monday as more video positions, angles are shown?
Boy, that's a big question. And,
that is.
There's a lot of levels, I guess I might think about that on. One is I think it's an unfortunate sign of the times that something like this is a national news story at all. When I was that age, when I was 17, when high school kids, got into mischief, there weren't people filming it and making it available to the whole world to look at. And I think there was maybe something about this story that satisfied like a national hunger to have a story that was sort of a Rorschach test, that almost any viewer could look at this story through the lens of their own preconceptions and viewpoints and biases and whatever, and see a story that vindicated their worldview. And actually, I think that's still true even now. So I don't know that I think the additional as more perspectives got aired, I don't know that changed the minds of a whole lot of people about what they were seeing. Yeah, I think there were some people who were inclined to be very skeptical of the initial reporting, and then they felt very vindicated by the subsequent reporting. And I think there were some people who were inclined to, believe the initial reporting, and then were, not very impressed by the subsequent reporting. So it seems to me that it remains a bit of a Rorschach test, and I think for Trump it was a welcome distraction from the shutdown that people were talking about this for a while, and for the idea that whether a group of teenagers from Covington, Kentucky, were well behaved or not on a field trip seems to me to be about as unnewsworthy of a national story as I could think of. But it did catch some larger. It was a metaphor for some larger themes that are dividing the country, I think.
Well, and it's interesting. I don't know about you, but one of the things that I actually didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it until Monday when it came back around, not because of the additional angles, but I have just I kind of have, there was a number of people who worked with Steve Jobs who talked about how you had to cut off his highs and his lows if you really wanted to work with him, right? You had to just kind of have a filtering device. And I have kind of come to the same conclusion, or at least the same pragmatic outcome when it comes to what's on my social networking sites. So if everybody and their brother has an opinion about some video, I am really inclined just to be like, I'm not even going to pay attention.
Yeah,
when it first goes around,
Right. That's what I was saying. It's such an unnewsworthy thing to worry about. We're really talking about whether a group of kids from Covington, Kentucky, who are high school teenagers, were well behaved or poorly behaved on a field trip. It's really it just has
or was it a
little...
smirk or was it not a smirk? As if that exactly, somehow, and and I think I think the things that are actually kind of more long-term interesting here is one, the way that we now consume and put pressure on traditional press outlets to react to stories in a way that I don't think would have happened before. And you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, I tell students in my mass media and politics class, you really have to kind of go around your day assuming that you're being videoed all the time, especially if, I don't know if this is the case in your class, but my guess is that students have out their laptops and their devices. They could be recording you.
Yeah, I think that is the case. I mean, I don't routinely record my own classes, but I think some students do. But I do record some of my classes, like if it's a review session or something, and I always have to give that warning to the students. I say, today I'm recording. I'm going to make today's recording available to all the students. So be careful what you say, just if you're chatting with each other at your seats before class or during a break, because it's all going to be picked up. Everybody's going to hear it, and that's the kind of fishbowl that kids have to live in today. That I thank my lucky stars I didn't have to grow up in a fishbowl like that.
And you never know what the thing will be. I mean, the Covington Catholic was there because they were trying to make a statement about pro-life policies, and of course that has not at all been the hit. It was the pickup, and again, whether or not these kids were behaving well or not well is not a big national story. But I think the fact that it is a story is what's interesting here for a little bit of picking. And I guess continue.
On that point, I think you're right. I mean, the fact that they're from Kentucky, which to some people in the country signifies a certain, demographic that people in other, and then the fact that they're there for a pro-life rally, and that so many of them were wearing the MAGA hats and other Trump-related stuff, that just it just turned them from people into metaphors, I think, right?
Yes.
So that people are just looking at them and thinking, well, that is a segment of the country that a lot of other people in the country are worried about, and so that sort of, I think, amplified the implications of everything that they did.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that it is funny to me, and I'm kind of curious about your point on this. Is I think on the left there has been this idea that it's the crazies on the right who they don't understand the sophisticated nature of reporting. They don't get science, and we do. And, pizza gators are the right wingers. And, in this moment, I saw a lot. You're right. This all became a stand-in for the left. And it's fascinating. It's very, it kind
Yeah,
of troubles me on a level that I think that that neither the left, I think both the left and the right are doing the same thing, and both of them don't realize that they're being not very critical about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as a New Yorker who has been living and teaching in Kentucky for a long time, I feel like I can see a little bit of both sides of this, of how people perceive it. And I think it's almost impossible for a lot of people from New York to see a group of Kentucky teenagers from an all-male school wearing Trump stuff at a pro-life rally and not automatically assume that those kids are racists. And then when you watch them interacting with this guy, and you bring that presumption to bear, then what you're seeing looks very, very terrible. And on the other hand, I think a lot of people from the right and people that I've interacted with in northern Kentucky, really have they have a view on these kids where these are good kids, right? And so if you just look at it through that lens, then you can't see that they actually are in some ways doing things that are offensive and that could be considered bad behavior. And the spin that it's I guess Mitch McConnell's own personal PR person was also wrote the letter on behalf of this kid, and the spin that's in that letter strikes me as just as implausible as the most negative theories. And I think to me these kids were behaving somewhat badly. But not any badly than a lot of teenagers sometimes behave. So certainly not anything newsworthy, but nor were they like perfect angels the way Nick Sandmann portrays himself to be in the letter that Mitch McConnell's PR person wrote for him.
But isn't it kind of ironic, though, that in the wake of there was kind of all of this casting on the idea, well, we shouldn't be. And I'm a video game player, right? So Gamergate was a big deal for me. The just the nastiness that right-wing individuals slung at women video gamers and journalists was horrendous. And it's what's interesting about the irony here is the same tools being used against Covington Catholic, not letting the school open. Again, as you pointed out, just because at worst we're talking about kids who are just displaying some potentially poor behavior.
Yeah, that's all I think it was too. I wouldn't say it was anything more than that, but I also wouldn't say that they were displaying perfectly good, wonderful behavior either. And so I think you hear that. I think that's the thing, is that people on both sides have a lot of. There's a lot of perspective that people bring to bear when looking at what they're seeing, and the behavior may look much worse than what it really was to some people, and the behavior may look totally blameless to other people, and people are just really bringing their own their own perspectives. That's why I just called it a Rorschach test. I think that's what people are seeing, what they're seeing, and people I think were kind of hungry that weekend maybe for something other than the shutdown to start thinking about or something. So maybe that helped amplify it.
Maybe I do think it just being such an interesting picture is part of it, but we'll save that for a different conversation, because I know we need to move forward to something that I know that you have some interesting theories on, Ken. I have been mulling myself, and that has been Giuliani's continual maybe shifting, maybe brilliant strategy when it comes to what's happening with collusion and not collusion and his positions in the president. And most specifically, he kind of has an interview this week where he seemingly, I'll say in a bit of generousness, he seemingly it seems to kind of pull back and says, well, I have not been arguing that there's no collusion. I've just been arguing that there's no collusion as vis-a-vis the president of the United States. There's not as he says, quote, there's not a single bit of evidence the president of the United States committed this crime, or here committed this crime, end quote. And this has kind of sent everybody into a little bit of a tizzy, because president's Twitter account and others seem to be a little broader than this. So has Giuliani kind of gotten off message here, or I know we were just talking a minute ago about the Stone dive, or is he setting us up for a bigger bombshell down the road to say, look, no, I told you, it could have been Trump Jr. What do you think about that, Ken?
Yeah, and I want to add also not only the bit about whether what he said was that there was no collusion, or whether it was only that it was subordinates to the president that were colluding, but not the president himself. But the other one like that is whether the negotiations about Trump to build a Trump Tower Moscow
Yes.
went on all the way through Election Day, or whether they stopped much earlier in the year. And he's been on both sides of that one lately as well. And so he keeps saying things that seem incredibly damaging, and then walking them back, and then giving an explanation. So it'll be something along the lines of, well, first he'll say, yeah, the president was, there were negotiations going on for Trump Tower Moscow right up through November. Then he'll say, I never said that. And then he'll say, but even if that was true, it wouldn't be a crime, right? And so that's sort of the 1-2-3 punch he keeps doing. And so it looks kind of dysfunctional and incompetent, and he looks kind of senile and all that. But I did think there might be a method to it. There might be a method to the apparent madness. And what I was thinking he might be up to is, if he knows that there's certain things that are very damaging to the president that are imminently going to go public, like maybe he knew that this Stone indictment was imminently coming down, and it was going to contain that paragraph 12 that we just looked at and all that. And so he knows some of these facts a little bit before they go public. And I think that possibly, if you want to give him credit for being like a Lieutenant Columbo level of genius or something, right? then acting like an idiot but really being smart, then it's possible. And I'm not saying I really truly believe this, but I think it's possible that what we're seeing is that if he, by both stating the damaging facts that are going to come out and then walking them back and saying I never said that, he gets those facts out there so that by the time they actually come out, they can be dismissed as old news. But yet by kind of walking them back right in real time, like he just ends the conversation by just saying, oh, I didn't actually say that, so then he doesn't have to talk about it more. And then the other thing is, when he usually does add some kind of legal argument, however thin it might be, like he'll typically say, well, this happened. Well, no, this didn't happen. But if it had happened, it wouldn't be a crime. And he gives some explanation for why it wouldn't be a crime. That kind of does signal to the Fox News, to the president's partisans and supporters, what the legal argument is, so that by the time this thing comes out, they've kind of already heard it. They kind of know what they're supposed to say about it. And so it minimizes the thing of people who want to protect the president being caught totally by surprise later about what they're supposed to say about something.
And what's one of the things that I had thought about was, and I think you can be right about that, kind of the messaging strategy, or you call it the three punch.
Yeah.
Is I know that the Washington Post and others, they've pointed to Donald Trump's Twitter feed, and he has a bunch of them where he is outright saying that the Trump campaign itself had no collusion. On February 16th of last year, he says the Trump campaign did nothing wrong, no collusion. August 1st, he says it's a total hoax. The Trump campaign had no collusion. December, as recently as December 10th, it's just a smoking gun because there's no collusion between the Trump campaign. So he's set this bar much higher than Giuliani does. But to kind of tie it a little bit back to Covington Catholic, I'm wondering if maybe the Washington Post, the New York Times have not missed the boat about the Twitter feed, which is, I don't think the average person cares about what Donald Trump tweeted 1 year ago or 6 months ago or 2.5 weeks ago. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the average, it depends which average person, but probably, there's a lot of people who feel strongly about Trump in both directions. So, in that sense, if someone feels strongly about Trump and they like him, they probably don't care about that. And actually, if they feel strongly that they don't like him,
they're not watching his feed anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what he said in February. So I think that sort of bit of, does this contradict things that Trump previously told the public? Ultimately, most members of the public already know whether they like Trump or don't like Trump, so that won't matter that much. But the one thing I think that I would say is the bigger thing that might matter is right now most of the criminal counts and most of the Giuliani statements have related to whether certain individuals who've been indicted for different things or convicted even of some things, have lied to investigators, have lied to Congress, et cetera. And so, I think that can sort of be painted as, well, those people, maybe they told lies, but that's got nothing to do with the president. But I think ultimately what's happening is the lies that they're telling are all about the collusion. right?
Right.
So I think we are moving towards a situation where collusion to a great extent I think has already been proved just in the various cases where there have been convictions and guilty pleas, because even if people are only getting convicted for lying to Congress, if what they lied to Congress about is whether there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, then I think ultimately that's going to move the ball more than the particular questions about who was telling the truth when. And I think collusion is sort of the proof of collusion is within sight now, I think.
Now here is, and I know we can just kind of hint at it. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to float it out there, Ken, is we now, and a few months ago, we talked about what happens if Democrats take a hold of the House. And what does that mean specifically for the ongoing Mueller conversation? That's one of the ones that you and myself had.
Yeah.
So here we are, Nancy Pelosi's in charge. We're going to talk in a minute about the shutdown. We've already seen that these two are going to go nose to nose on everything. What does this mean potentially politically for Donald Trump? Do you think that if the catch there in paragraph 12, if this is leading to more, do we see actual charges against the president coming out of the House? Do the Democrats bother to do that? Or do they just let this kind of sit and hang around the president and use it as an ongoing bludgeon for a campaign?
Yeah, I think the answer, my prediction is that it's somewhere in the middle. I think that the House will ultimately set up some select committees to investigate whether there ought to be articles of impeachment. But my sense is that those select committees will take their time investigating that. Right,
Mm-hmm.
so that we'll see a lot of, especially I think because of what Barr said at his confirmation hearing in the Senate. The two things that Barr said that relate to the Mueller investigations: one, he said he wouldn't interfere with it and he'd let it conclude, and two, he said he would not publish it or publicize it. Right, so when he actually gets the Mueller report, as long as Barr's Attorney General, you and I are not going to see that report.
Yes.
So if that's going to be Barr's strategy, then the House is, I think, going to be looking for ways to bring out the same information that would be in the Mueller report. And so they can do their own parallel investigations. They can investigate the same things that Mueller investigated. They can use their subpoena power. They can do this in public hearings. It doesn't have to be in secret hearings. They can publish House reports. And all of that, I think, nominally and formally is for the purpose of deciding whether to bring articles of impeachment. But I think that they probably have the hope that they can drag those kind of investigations out for the whole 2 years, till the 2020 elections, and never get around to having an actual impeachment, because it's the impeachment. It doesn't benefit the Democrats at all. It can only end with an exoneration of Trump, right? Because you're not going to get
the Senate.
Yeah, not enough Republicans could possibly turn against him. I think he might, as he just did in this week's budget votes, he might lose a small handful of Republicans, but he's never going to lose enough Republicans. So he'll end up being acquitted. And also, once that happens, then the idea of further investigating at that point, it just seems like that puts an end on all that. So I think it's altogether better for the Democrats to just slow walk an impeachment investigation and never quite get around to doing the impeachment.
Yeah, I think on that we're in a lot of agreement, but I was just curious what you had to say about that. But now I know we want to talk a little bit about the continuing, and now today it would appear, the end of the shutdown. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit, and I'd like to thank all of our sustaining monthly Patreon supporters. Your support is what makes the Politics Guys possible. This is not easy to do. It takes a lot of equipment, it takes a lot of time, and when you contribute monthly, that's what makes it possible for us to do this. Now, it's one thing for me to just give you my gratitude, although you have a ton of it, but Patreon supporters get a bunch of special perks, including a weekly bonus show. And as a matter of fact, Ken and I are going to be recording that later today, and you get that if you are just any kind of Patreon supporter. But you get more than just that. Additionally, Mike's 12-part American Government Nuts and Bolts series, which is currently in part 5. I don't know if you've been keeping up. And this is for supporters who are at the $5 per month or higher level. So everybody you support, you get the weekly bonus show. You get $5 or more, and you're going to be getting Mike's 12-part American Government Nuts and Bolts series. And as a former student, I can say it's a really great stuff. Additionally, though, you're also going to, at the 5-month month or higher, you're going to get Mike and Jay's Deep Dive Policy series. They've already discussed healthcare, racism, sexism, and at this very moment, they are recording their own firearm policy and the Second Amendment episode. So if you're interested in any of that, that is going to be at the $5 or higher level. And I know down the line, I will have some things for you as well, but we'll hold on to that for now. And I just ask, if you aren't already, would you become a monthly Patreon supporter? And if you want to do that, it's easy. You're going to head to patreon.com/politicsguys. That's Patreon, patreon.com/politicsguys. And you can become a monthly supporter. You're going to get my gratitude plus a whole host of really cool things on the basis of what level a month you support. Thank you so much. And so with that, we're going to move on to our fourth and our final story for the day, and that is the continuation and the ending of the shutdown. So right before we were getting ready to go live today, it appeared that Donald Trump has had his first major public speech on ending the shutdown. As a matter of fact, it looks like we're going to have a stopgap measure that's going to last for 3 weeks here into February to end the longest federal shutdown, or at least partial shutdown in history at 35 days, which began just before Christmas. And this is one that I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. So, Ken, I'm going to let you get started on this because otherwise I'll just take off and there'll be no room for you.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the ending? And specifically, why now?
Yeah, I think why now is I heard that there was it was reported in the Washington Post that there was a very rough meeting amongst the Senate Republicans with Pence earlier this morning, where the Senate Republicans were basically turning against McConnell and Pence and saying, it's all your fault and this has got to end. So maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe today was the first day I think we had major airport disruptions because of air traffic controllers not showing up. The New York and Philadelphia airports were shut down today because of that. So I think the idea that things are just going to get worse and worse. Maybe it was just yesterday that Trump's chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors projected that there'd probably be zero growth this quarter, largely because of the shutdown. Those kinds of things. It seemed like something had to give, and I guess that could have been today, could have been tomorrow, but I feel like it had to end the way it ended because the public never stopped primarily blaming the Republicans for it. The public wasn't as divided on this as they were on a lot of public opinion issues. So I think the Democrats were in a catbird seat in terms of the longer it went, the more there'd be more pressure on Trump and on McConnell than on the Democrats.
Now, I think you're right, and I would actually say that another one is tax returns. Worrying about how is that going to go through, how long is it going to take, especially given that it looked like that they were not going to be able to be forced to come in and work without pay. But this seems like a Trump loss to me, and not just a little loss, but a huge loss because the longer that this goes on, I think you're right. He accumulates some negatives that has never seemed to bother him in the past. But I mean, his wall, I think, is now effectively dead, and he's not going to be able to get to day 35 again. So I don't know. If I was advising Donald Trump, I almost think that I would have said, if what you really want is a wall, now hear me right, I'm not a wall fan. But if that is in fact your end goal, you need to keep holding out. What do you think?
Yeah, except I don't actually believe that what he really wanted was a wall. So I don't know that was as much of an issue. I think that the wall is a metaphor more than anything else. And what he really wanted was to try to try to demonstrate to the House that even though Democrats now have the House, Republicans are still going to call the shots. And I think that this was just a metaphor for that. And I'm certain that the Democrats saw this as a metaphor for that. And that made it absolutely impossible for the Democrats to give in, right? That they're either going to be equal partners in governing the country, and they're going to establish that right now by not giving in, or they're just going to be marginalized, and the 2018 election won't make a difference, right? And that would be totally unacceptable. So I think both sides, the stakes were higher than just the wall. I mean, if it was really about the wall, then Trump wouldn't have asked for $5 billion. He would have asked for $40 billion, right? That's what it would take to actually build a wall. But I think what it was about was having a game of chicken to show who's boss. And I think that's much more what it was about than the wall itself. In fact, similarly, if he really wanted the wall, actually the Democrats had previously offered to give him the whole wall and the whole, at least $25 billion in exchange for a permanent solution to DACA. So, I mean, he could have had the wall, and he probably still could have the wall, and a lot more money than he just asked for in this showdown, if he's willing to actually negotiate with Democrats and trade things that Democrats actually want in exchange for wall funding.
Now here's the part that I'm interested in personally, and that is that what does this mean as a precedent? Because effectively what both sides have said here is that who's going to be in the driver's seat between the presidency and the Congress moving forward is worth shutting down government for 35 days. Now, I recognize that Trump is getting some rightful blame on that, but I hate to blame. Democrats are in that boat too. So, over this money, they're going to have to be able to say, yeah, you know what, it was worth it for them to shut everything down. They're part of that equation, and now we've crossed the Rubicon.
Yeah. I guess I just totally, we finally could found something we could seriously disagree on.
Let's disagree about it. This is great.
Yeah, let's disagree about that, because I think that the only thing that the Democrats were saying, and they absolutely had to say it, they could not back down, is that, that if they're going to give up concessions, they're going to have to get something they want out of it, and they're not going to just be allowed. They're not going to negotiate with a hostage taker. And here, Trump wasn't offering the Democrats a single thing. He was just saying, I will shut down the government unless you give me some things that I want, in which case then I will reopen the government and give you nothing that you want other than reopening the government. And that's not an acceptable way for the president to function in a political climate now where the Democrats actually control the House. If Trump wants something like a wall, he's got to trade something that the Democrats want for that. And
isn't it likewise the other side? I mean, so when have Democrats ever said, oh no, let's not spend X billion on some program? So they're going to shut all of government down because they want to be able to play with the big boy? That's ridiculous.
No, they didn't do that. They passed actually 9 times since the Democrats took over the House. They passed the same bill to reopen the government.
Yes.
That Trump finally agreed to today.
That they knew he wouldn't sign.
But the only reason he wouldn't sign it is because he wasn't getting the wall funding.
Right.
So he wanted something for nothing, and they didn't give it.
Yeah, that's true. But you have to then be willing to say, we're willing to shut government down over the wall funding.
Yeah, sure, that we're not going to give you something for nothing. But he's the one demanding something for nothing and saying that he'll shut the government down if he doesn't get it. There's not a single flip example of that where the Democrats have said, well, we want something for nothing and we'll shut the government down if we don't get it.
Well, what I'm saying, though, is that the President of the United States and the other branch can rightfully say, we want this, give it to us or else. That's part of, not controlling all of government. The Democrats hold one chamber. They hold the House. Hard stop. So they are just as complicit when it comes to government getting shut down over $5, $8, $9 billion as is the other side to say, well, we've decided that we don't get anything for this, so we're going home.
They're not just as complicit because they didn't put anything in the funding bill that they passed that Trump objected to. They could have put in some. They would have been just as complicit if they would have done something like this. If they would have put in a funding bill, okay, here's the funding bill, and this gives permanent citizenship to all the DACA recipients. And if you want to not shut down the government, you've got to sign that. If they would have done something like that, that would have been equivalent to what Trump did. But they didn't do anything like that. They didn't put anything in any of these bills that Trump objected to.
But I mean, the lack of that is what he objected to.
Yeah, but the point is they got to negotiate separately about that. They got to keep
Why?
the government open. They got to agree
Why?
to things they agree to, because otherwise he's at fault for shutting it down. I mean, sure, he's got the legal authority to veto it and shut it down, but it's his fault that he did that. It's not their fault.
No,
and he said that himself.
There is equal. I mean, he did say that, and that was dumb. And I'm not a Trump supporter.
But it was true.
No, but it takes two sides. I mean, they could have opened government at any minute they wanted to by including the funding.
No, because then they would just be purely
they would have
giving
lost
up all of
political
their...
advantage. You're absolutely right, but that means that the political advantage outweighed opening up government.
No, it's not just advantage. It's actually their role in our constitutional system. They couldn't give up their role in our constitutional system and allow him to have dictatorial power.
That's not dictatorial power, Ken.
Yes, if he says, I want a wall and I'm going to shut down the government, I'm going to harm all the government.
That's Article 2, not signing. He does not have to sign a bill that comes from the House. That's not a dictatorial power.
Well, if he's willing to cause that much collateral damage if he doesn't get his way, there's nothing like that with the Democrats. They did not cause any kind of let me maybe try to say it this way. What we're really talking about is changes from the status quo. I think there is, there's a current budget, there's a status quo, and there's ways that each of them would like to make changes to the status quo. And what I'm saying is the political morality of this situation is if you can't agree on changes, you should at least be willing to keep the government open under the status quo. And that's what the Democrats were willing to do. And in fact, that's what Trump and McConnell also were willing to do in December. The Senate did pass that continuing resolution in December. It's identical to the one that that Trump just agreed to today. So I think, sir, as a matter of constitutional authority, he could veto. But as a matter of who's to blame for the shutdown, only Trump is to blame for the shutdown. The Democrats are blameless in this whole thing.
Well, I'm going to have to on this one. We don't often agree, I think, quite this vehemently. But to say that you have to agree to the status quo is to be hostage to what has ever come before you. Now, just to be clear, just so listeners on board, I think that the wall is a stupid, a stupid idea. And personally, I would like to see that money not go to something as dumb as a wall. As a matter of fact, I'd rather see it go to nothing at all, given my ideological tendencies. But the idea that a president has to must sign a status quo bill, and to say that then all the fault for a shutdown lies with the president who's laid out a constitutional claim to say, I'm not going to sign a bill that doesn't include these things, and that then somehow amounts to dictatorial powers, and that Democrats are blameless on a 35-day shutdown, I think just takes a little bit of ideological wiggling.
Democrats are completely blameless on this. I mean, when the voters vote for divided government, which is not an uncommon situation, right? We've had plenty of divided government in the history of the country. What that means is that the voters are willing to accept a lot of gridlock in terms of not much legislation getting passed, but they don't want the government to shut down because of that. They want the government to keep functioning and for there not to be a lot of change. And that's the very essence of what divided government is supposed to produce. And it's not supposed to produce a situation where one side says, well, I'm going to take all the marbles, or else I'm just going to cause as much collateral damage as I possibly can.
I mean, I understand your point of view on that one, Ken. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think that you are taking an implicit voter, what you think is a normative ought about those voters, assuming that therefore means that in the political circumstances, both sides ought to be willing to do whatever the status quo is, and that if either one side is not willing to do that status quo, then they have somehow left their
shutdown.
They're the ones who cause a shutdown, and they're the ones who should be blamed for that. Seems to me that's a house that rests on a shaky normative platform, and especially given that this is the party that says that government is such a big deal that we can't do without it.
That's right. That's why they voted 9 times since January to get the government reopened. and that's why the public
Oh,
agreed with them.
But again, on a bill that they knew was not going to get signed.
Well, yeah, because he was taking hostages, but you can't negotiate with hostage takers.
But see, again, your analogy there assumes that the president using his rightful veto power is a hostage taker.
Well, he is, because in this case, this all happened after he'd already made a deal with them in December.
I mean, that can be the case, but that doesn't mean until you've signed it that you've agreed to sign anything.
Well, if he reached a deal to have a continuing resolution that goes through February, and then at the last minute, in fact, after the Senate had unanimously voted in favor of that deal, after the president had said that they should unanimously vote in favor of that deal, then he tries to welsh on it and say, well, unless I get one more thing, this wall, I'm not going to sign it. Then it's really his fault if the government shuts down. That's all. I mean, he has constitutional authority to do it, but he deserves all the blame, 100% of it.
Well, I guess on that one, I think for the first time we've had our biggest debate on something, Ken, and I love it.
yeah. And I do think at least one thing maybe we'll agree on is that that the lesson that both sides will take from this now, Trump caved first on the speech and then on the shutdown, and I think the public has come around more and more to at least my way of looking at this than yours, according to the polls this week that I think led Trump to back down. And I think we hopefully won't see this again in 3 weeks, although it's possible we will.
I agree with you. I don't think that the public in general wants the government to shut down, but I don't think the public is as nuanced in that position as that you're giving them credit for.
Yeah. Well,
but,
I think the Democrats will do the same if Trump does the same, and I think the Democrats will come out on top again. What I hope could happen is that Trump will actually make a real deal. If he really wants a wall, and I'm not sure he really wants a wall, but if he really wants a wall...
Let's just hope he doesn't want a wall, because I'd prefer to not, but okay.
Yeah, but I think there's lots of things he could give up to the Democrats that they'd be willing to fund his wall. I don't think it's impossible to get a wall funded.
I don't know. If I was... See, on the other side, if I was a Democrat, I wouldn't want that wall for all kind of symbolic reasons, and I don't know if I'd want to bow to it for any particular give. But we have now actually, listeners, we have gone over time. So you've gotten bonus time with the politics guys. So Ken, it has been wonderful to be with you this week, and I love the fact that we finally found something that we could poke a little bit. This is great.
Yeah. Michael was saying that to me yesterday. He was saying when you do it with Trey, you guys are too friendly. You never disagree enough. So
well, listeners, there you go. We found the thing. This is the one. This is the one. But I will say again, listeners, if you'd like more from Ken and me, remember that you can still head to patreon.com/politicsguys, become a monthly contributor, and you will momentarily be having access to our bonus show. And as a matter of fact, in this bonus show, we're going to be taking a look at a historic Supreme Court case, which is in fact Ken's area of expertise. So this is going to be really interesting. And who knows, maybe we'll throw things at each other. I don't know. We'll find out. But the only way you're going to know is if you're a monthly supporter. But I would like to say right now, thank you to all of our supporters one last time. And I would also like to remind you that if you want to be that supporter show, you're going to head to patreon.com/politicsguys. So that's it. I hope you like what you heard. Listeners, head to politicsguys.com/support or to politicsguys.com and see the latest episodes. You can subscribe. Even if you're not going to become a monthly supporter, we ask that you share episodes, rate. You can, as always, hit us up on Facebook at mail@politicsguys.com or our ever feisty Facebook page, facebook.com/politicsguys page, or on Twitter at Politics Guys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. This episode is produced by Trey Orndorff. We'll have a new show with me and Ken on Wednesday. We hope you'll be with us then.